My name is Sally. I am a 16-year-old in the 11th grade. This story is a record of an event that profoundly changed my life. Even now, I sometimes wonder if the choice I made at that time was the right one. But every time, I am convinced that my decision was not wrong. Sitting in front of the white dressing table, I noticed that my favorite mascara, which I had been using for years, was missing. It was one of the gifts my father had chosen for my 16th birthday. It was an expensive branded cosmetic, but more importantly, it was a precious item filled with the deep love of my father, who lived far away. It disappeared again. I muttered to myself without speaking aloud, and sighed deeply. I felt the anxiety growing larger inside my heart. Moreover, 2 pairs of my favorite branded sneakers, which my father had bought for special occasions, also disappeared suddenly. Day by day, the anxiety and frustration of losing my treasured items were eating away at me. It has been a year since I started living with my mother, my stepfather Douglas, and my stepbrother Thomas. On the surface, it seemed like a peaceful home where we lived as a new family. But beneath that calm surface, reality was heading in a completely different direction. Every day, little by little but surely, I felt as if everything was falling apart, weighing heavily on my heart. It has been 7 years since my parents divorced. I was in the 3rd grade, 9 years old at the time. I was so shocked that I thought the world might end, but my parents prioritized me even after the divorce. They had many discussions and chose joint custody. They planned a detailed schedule so I could spend equal time with both of them. However, 4 years ago, that stable life underwent a major change. My father was unexpectedly promoted to a higher position at his company. It was a joyful event accompanied by a salary increase, but at the same time, he could not avoid a transfer to a distant location. At 12 years old, I struggled with the decision and ultimately chose to live with my mother, as I did not want to leave the familiar friends and school environment. My father accepted my decision with deep understanding and love. In fact, he continued to provide both financial and emotional support so that I could lead a fulfilling life. To make life with my mother more stable, my father readily agreed to pay child support, which was a significant 20% of his income. 3 years ago, my mother had a fateful encounter with Douglas. I later learned it was a chance meeting at a school parent meeting. Douglas had a son, Thomas, who was 1 year older than me. Douglas seemed to be a gentle and thoughtful person, and since Thomas attended the same school as me, I believed everything would work out well. However, that expectation did not last long. Douglas and Thomas moved into our house on a calm spring day. Douglas was tall, always well-dressed in a clean suit, and never without a gentle smile. Thomas was the same height as me, an active boy who excelled in sports. At first, I had high hopes for life with this new family. But those hopes melted away like spring snow in no time. The changes began at the dinner table. Previously, my mother and I would talk cheerfully about what happened at school or our dreams for the future during meals. Now, those conversations were gradually replaced by Douglas and Thomas's discussions. My mother listened to them attentively, nodding along, making me feel as if I were invisible. "Sally, why don't you say something?" Occasionally, my mother would encourage me to speak. But soon enough, Douglas or Thomas would bring up a new topic, leaving my words hanging in the air. Even weekend family outings started to be planned without me, going to the movies or shopping at the mall. These plans were made without my knowledge, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "Oh, I forgot to tell you, Sally. I'm so sorry." Even when she apologized later, it sounded like empty words to me. In my heart, loneliness and anger slowly began to pile up. What hurt more was the change in my mother. The mother I used to know would always be there for me, understanding my feelings. But now, she seemed like a completely different person, siding with Douglas and Thomas and pushing me to the background. "Mom, please listen to me." Even when I pleaded with her, her response was always the same. "You have your father, don't you? Thomas has no one else." Those words seeped into my heart like poison. It's true that I have my father, but that doesn't justify my mother neglecting me. Thomas had a girlfriend his age, Nora. He often invited her to our house, and she grew close to Douglas and my mother. Amidst all this, my belongings started to disappear. At first I thought it was just my imagination, but as more things went missing, I became certain it wasn't a coincidence. It felt like only expensive cosmetics or gifts from my father were being targeted. The first thing I noticed missing was the luxurious hand cream my father had given me for my birthday. Since I used it every night before bed, I realized it was gone right away. Initially, I thought it might have been due to my own carelessness, so I searched my entire room. It must be somewhere. I told myself this as I searched deep into my closet. But I couldn't find it. After that, my favorite lip gloss, a new eyeshadow palette, and even the special mascara my father had chosen for me vanished, as if they had disappeared into thin air. When I talked to my mother about it, she initially suspected the housekeeper. She was a part-time worker who came twice a week. Although she had been a trusted person for years, my mother took my claim seriously and eventually decided to terminate her contract. "I'm sorry, but my daughter's important belongings have been disappearing." When my mother told her this, the housekeeper nodded sadly. She had worked for us for over 20 years. I felt a lingering sense of guilt in my heart. However, even after the housekeeper stopped coming, the items continued to disappear. This time, even shoes became a target. In particular, the expensive sneakers my father had bought for me started vanishing one by one. One day, while I was casually scrolling through social media, I came across a post by Thomas's girlfriend, Nora. In the photo, she was wearing a pair of shoes I immediately recognized. They were unmistakably my treasured sneakers. I felt my heartbeat quicken. But there was no concrete proof that they were mine. It was possible that she had simply bought the same pair of sneakers. Still, my heart felt clouded with unease. Then one day, I heard the sound of the front door opening and instinctively called out, "Thomas, welcome home." But the person who walked into the living room was his girlfriend, Nora. "Nora, why are you here? The front door should have been locked." I was so shocked that I raised my voice without thinking. Hearing my voice, my mother rushed out of her room. "What's wrong, Sally?" "Mom." Nora unlocked the front door and came in. "Oh, the other day, Thomas asked if he could give Nora a spare key." Well, I didn't think it would be a problem. While I stood there confused, Nora cheerfully said, "Hello, Mom. Sally. I'm sorry if I startled you." "It's fine." I hadn't told Sally yet, so it's no wonder she's surprised. My heart was filled with distrust. Why does someone who's not family need a spare key? I have a right to privacy too. This is unacceptable. I shouted without thinking, and both my mother and Nora exchanged bewildered looks. "Sally, don't say such things. Nora is an important person to Thomas. And doesn't matter. Mom, who's more important to you, me or Thomas? I can't stand this house anymore." Tears welled up in my eyes. But the words I had hoped to hear from my mother never came. "Sally, how could you say such a thing? Thomas and Nora are important family members too. If you can't understand that, you should leave this house." With that, my mother brought out the key to the second house and handed it to me. Take some time to cool off." Devastated by her words, I snatched the key roughly. I went to my room, packed only the essentials, and left the house, holding back my tears. And so began my life at the second house. The second house wasn't far from home, but it was an old house with poor maintenance, making it quite inconvenient. However, since I no longer had a place in my own home, I had no choice but to adapt to this new life. After getting somewhat accustomed to life at the second house, I came across Nora's social media post and thought to myself, I can't let this continue. I need to make things clear. That morning, I made an important decision. I immediately contacted my father. He listened to me earnestly and took action right away. My conversation with him turned out to be more constructive than I had expected. "Sally, your safety is the top priority, but to solve this problem we need solid evidence." My father calmly analyzed the situation and gave me advice. He also arranged for a consultation with a lawyer, allowing us to create an appropriate plan of action from a legal perspective. The following weekend, a small security camera my father sent arrived. It was a state-of-the-art wireless camera that allowed real-time monitoring through a smartphone. I carefully devised a plan. Pretending to bring some belongings back, I returned to my family home and secretly installed the cameras. I checked the camera placement, angles, and locations multiple times to ensure they would capture sufficient evidence. I decided to place one camera in the gap between the bookshelf and another inside the closet. Perfect. When I finished setting them up, I felt a small sense of accomplishment. This wasn't just about security. It was the first step in protecting my rights. For the following week, I continued my usual routine while collecting evidence. During the day, I attended school. At night, I studied at the second house. Amidst this ordinary life, the cameras kept recording reliably. The decisive evidence was captured on the 6th day after installation, at 2 a.m. I woke up to the notification sound from my smartphone. Motion detected. When I opened the screen, the exact moment was displayed. Thomas was quietly opening the door to my room and stepping inside. He moved cautiously, as if he had rehearsed this many times, and approached my dressing table. I held my breath and continued watching the screen. I could feel my heart pounding intensely. Thomas opened the drawer and started rummaging through my cosmetics. His movements were practiced, clearly indicating this wasn't his first time. When he placed the cosmetics into his bag, his expression showed not a trace of guilt. Then, the most shocking moment came. He took out his smartphone and began sending a message. The audio was recorded clearly. "This will make your birthday present perfect. It's a high-end brand eyeshadow palette." His voice even carried a sense of pride, as if he had bought it himself. Next, he turned to the closet and started rummaging through my shoes. He picked up a new pair of sneakers and sent another message. "I'll include these too. I'm sure you'll love them." In that moment, something inside me shifted decisively. This was no longer a mere family dispute. Hearing those words made something boil within me. It wasn't anger, but a feeling closer to sadness. A deep sense of disappointment at how a relationship that should be built on trust as family had been so distorted. This was a clear act of crime, and it required immediate action. I saved the video and contacted my father right away. Despite the late hour, my father answered the phone immediately. "The evidence is solid." His voice was calm. With the evidence in hand, I consulted with my father to plan our next steps. I wanted to aim for a fundamental resolution, not mere retaliation. We'll consult the lawyer first thing tomorrow. Until then, act as usual. It's crucial not to arouse suspicion. My father took swift action. After consulting with the lawyer, he also discussed the situation with the police, ensuring they were prepared to intervene if necessary. Then, one Saturday afternoon, a meeting was arranged with my father, mother, Douglas, Thomas, and the school's advisory teacher. The atmosphere in the counseling room was heavy. When my mother, Douglas, and Thomas arrived, the tension in the room grew even stronger. My mother wore a confused expression. Douglas crossed his arms in silence. Thomas stared at the floor, avoiding eye contact with anyone. "Today, we need to discuss an important matter," the advisor began quietly. His voice was calm and steady, befitting an experienced teacher. "Sally has made a serious complaint." At those words, my mother leaned forward. "What do you mean?" "She has accused Thomas of taking her personal belongings." "That's... Sally, how could you say such a thing?" "Exactly. How dare you accuse him without proof? Thomas would never do something like that." Both my mother and Douglas protested, their faces turning red with anger. Seeing this, I suddenly signaled my father with my eyes. He nodded and opened my laptop. The footage from the security camera began to play. It showed Thomas sneaking into my room late at night. He rummaged through my cosmetics and packed them into his bag. The audio of his phone conversation followed. Everything was recorded in vivid detail. As the video played, I could feel the air in the room freeze. Thomas's face turned pale. Douglas's eyes widened in shock. My mother covered her mouth with her hands, her expression one of disbelief. When the video ended, there was a moment of silence. It was Thomas who broke it. "This is not true. It's a misunderstanding." He began denying it in a trembling voice, but his agitation was evident. "I bought them with my own allowance. The same one Sally has." Douglas stepped forward to defend his son. "That's right. There's no way my son is a thief. And isn't this kind of surveillance illegal?" The lawyer responded calmly. "The installation of this security camera is a legitimate self-defense measure to protect private property. In fact, breaking and entering in the middle of the night along with theft are far more serious illegal acts." Douglas's expression twisted. Then maybe Sally showing off her expensive things tempted him. Lavish gifts from her father. What else do you expect when she flaunts them like that? Hearing those words, I almost shouted out. Blaming the victim while ignoring the crime was infuriating. However, my father placed a hand on my shoulder, encouraging me to remain calm. "Mr. Douglas?" My father began Nather in a quiet but firm tone. "Do you think justifying your child's actions is appropriate as a parent?" The room grew even heavier with those words. Douglas was at a loss for words, his mouth hanging open in shock. Faced with undeniable evidence, Thomas had no choice but to concede. An agreement was reached to return the stolen items and pay a settlement. Considering Douglas's own standing, it was clear they wanted to avoid involving the police. A significant settlement amount was agreed upon. According to Thomas, the stolen items had been used for leisure money or given to his girlfriend. Then my mother spoke. "Sally, did you really have to go this far?" Her voice was trembling. "Thomas is still just a child. We're family. Can't you be a little more forgiving?" At that moment, something inside me broke irrevocably. It felt as though the last bit of hope I held on to had shattered completely. "Family?" My voice sounded colder than I had expected. "Mom, aren't I your daughter? Why do you only protect Thomas?" My mother faltered, unable to respond, and looked away. Then my father spoke, his tone calm but resolute. "There is another issue we need to address." He pulled out his smartphone. "I'd like an explanation regarding the use of the child support I've been providing." I saw the color drain from my mother's face. My father began presenting evidence, screenshots of my mother's social media posts, and records of extravagant purchases. Proof that the child support meant for me had been spent on my mother's luxuries and on Douglas and Thomas. I've been paying 20% of my income as child support. This was meant for Sally's education and living expenses. But looking at how it's actually been used, my mother, pale and shaken, collapsed into a chair. Douglas looked confused, his gaze darting between my mother and my father. That's... My mother finally managed to speak, her voice strained. "It was necessary for our new family, too. I wanted Thomas to have a good environment as well." "You were using my child support for your new family?" My voice trembled. "Mom, was I just a source of income to you?" The advisor cleared his throat, trying to steer the conversation back on track. "Now then, regarding the resolution for this matter, I've already made my decision." I stood up and turned to my father. "I want to go live with you, Dad. I don't want to come back here anymore." The room fell completely silent at my words. My mother's face was filled with disbelief. She opened her mouth as if to speak, but couldn't find the words. "Sally, think this through calmly." After a moment, my mother managed to force out her voice. "What about school? Your friends? Your whole life is here." It was true, as she said. But that was no longer enough to hold me back. "I'll be fine," I replied quietly but firmly. "I've thought everything through." My father placed a hand on my shoulder and nodded gently. His presence gave me immense courage. "Now, let's discuss the specific procedures," the lawyer said as he pulled out some documents. "Sally is 16, so she has the right to designate her residence. With court approval." The discussions that followed felt like I was walking through a fog. Custody changes, termination of child support, transfer procedures for school. One by one, the concrete steps were decided. My mother vehemently resisted the decision, but I realized it was because she feared losing the child support payments. In the end, through discussions mediated by the lawyer, custody was transferred to my father. On the way home, I cried in my father's car. They weren't tears of sadness, but tears of relief from the burden I had been carrying. My father said nothing as he drove the car toward his home. "I need to go back for my belongings." "It's okay. You can pick up what you need later. For now, resting is the most important thing." That night, lying in the guest room at my father's house, I felt a sense of relief for the first time in a long while. The room was simple but clean and calming. The day came to retrieve the rest of my belongings from my mother's house. My father offered to come with me, but I chose to go alone. As I was packing, my mother spoke to me. "Have you really decided? Are you truly not coming back?" "Yes, I've decided. This is my choice. The past is the past, and I'm ready to move forward with my life." My mother seemed like she wanted to say something, but remained silent in the end. I finished packing my last bag and headed to the front door. "Sally," she called out to me. With my hand on the doorknob, I paused for a moment. "Thank you, but I'm not coming back." "Goodbye, Mom." At my new school, I quickly made friends. Sometimes I think about my mother, but it's no longer with the same painful emotions as before. Instead, it's a quiet acceptance, accompanied by the certainty that I made the right choice. My father is still busy with work, but we spend more time together now. On weekends, we go to the movies or go shopping together. It feels like real parent-child time. The termination of child support had a significant impact on my mother and Douglas's life. Since the support from my father accounted for a large portion of her income, its loss hit their household finances hard. Douglas's salary alone wasn't enough to maintain their previous standard of living. They could no longer afford the mortgage on their house in the upscale neighborhood and had to move to a more affordable apartment complex. They also struggled to cover Thomas's private high school tuition, leading them to consider transferring him to a public school. However, I heard that even at his new school, after his actions came to light, he began to be distanced by his friends. My mother had to start working again, but after years as a housewife, the gap in her employment history made it difficult for her to find the job she wanted. She began juggling multiple part-time jobs. Occasionally, I received messages from my mother, crying about wanting to return to her old life. But there is no going back to those days. The decision I made at 16 brought significant changes. But they were necessary changes. The courage to protect my rights and pursue happiness. I learned that this is a right everyone deserves to have. Most importantly, I realized that family is not solely defined by blood relations. Through this experience, I deeply understood that true family is about relationships where people understand and support one another.